Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. Our very own Dr. Shabir Ally had the honor of presenting at an international conference held by the Muslim World League on fostering cultural relations between the United States of America and the Islamic world. The participants brought together academics and religious leaders from all over the world. Let's sit down and hear Dr. Shabir's thoughts on his experience at the conference. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So I know you were recently invited to a conference on cultural relations by the Muslim World League. Tell me a little bit about, what struck you about the conference.
First of all, some background about it, details. It was held in mid-September in Manhattan, New York, and this was an occasion on which we had many speakers from around the world, Muslims and non-Muslims, speaking on the subject of cultural relations between the United States of America and the Muslim world. And it brought together these speakers to focus on this question: how can we bridge that divide that seems to exist between basically East and West, more broadly, but more specifically between the United States and the Muslim world?
So you said there were a lot of non-Muslim presenters as well. What was the discourse like between when you saw the presentations from Muslim presenters in comparison to non-Muslims? Was it starkly different, similar?
The presentations were so similar that if one did not know who was speaking, one would not be able to distinguish between the Muslim and the non-Muslim sometimes. Or to put it another way, sometimes when the non-Muslims spoke, they spoke so favorably and in such an educated manner about Islam that one would think that one is actually listening to a Muslim presenter.
So for example, hear that.
Professor Gerhard Bovering, for example, Yale University professor, spoke about the Quran and highlighted some verses that are very striking for him, including Surah 24, verse number 35, the verse that describes God as the light of the heavens and the earth. And he spoke so well of the Quran that one would think, okay, we're listening to a believer in the Quran here. But of course, he was approaching it from an academic point of view. We had presenters who are not Muslims, but they spanned a wide variety of fields, political, social, academic, religious, and so on. And as I said, there were both Muslims and non-Muslims. There were Muslims from all around the world. I met Muslims from Malaysia, from Australia, New Zealand, from Vienna.
And what was your area of focus? Because I know you presented there. So what did you speak about?
Well, my topic was Islam's contribution to global peace. And I started out by saying that it's a bit odd that we're saying that in Manhattan, the very place on which 9/11 occurred. After 9/11, it seemed that people would think that Islam could not contribute anything to peace. But I relied on a book written by Graham Fuller entitled A World Without Islam, in which he tried to imagine what would the world have been like if Islam is taken out of the picture entirely. And he saw that the world would still be full of conflict, and I pointed to some of these historical conflicts that existed before the religion of Islam and continued even after the religion of Islam, and that the clash between East and West existed anyway, and the tensions between the United States of America and Russia is a lingering evidence of that clash between East and West that has nothing to do with Islam. And of course, the present standoff between North Korea and the United States of America is further evidence of this similar type of phenomenon, a difference between East and West that has nothing to do with the religion of Islam.
So just out of curiosity, you talked about the conference specifically focusing on the U.S., but then you also talk about East and West and sort of your own interpretation of that. So did you find that there was a disconnect in some ways at the conference related to that topic?
Well, obviously the conference was held for the purpose of highlighting the United States of America as the one exemplar of the West, rather than thinking of the West more broadly. And this may have political undertones which are difficult to pinpoint exactly, but overlooking those undertones, we should say, political undertones, one can then think about the broader benefit of having this kind of dialogue. Normally we would have interfaith dialogues rather than intercultural dialogues, and so it was titled perhaps deliberately to avoid the faith issues and look at the fact that we are all human beings with different cultures from various parts of the world, and we need to communicate with each other, we need to learn from each other, and we need to grow together and work with each other to combat common problems like extremism and violence and terrorism, and more broadly poverty and climate change and so on. Although some of the things that should have been mentioned, one would expect if one wanted to be very specific about what we need to do, were not mentioned. So climate change, for example, was hardly mentioned. And one would think more broadly about the problem of extremism and terrorism and violence. If we are going to have this kind of communication between the countries, then we need to think about what corrective measures need to be made to the foreign policies of the various nations and even the domestic policies. So in terms of the Muslim countries, they need to think about the domestic policies that could give rise to a feeling of isolation and closed avenues for the youth that sometimes, that feeling sometimes gives rise to terrorist outbursts. And on the other hand, we need to think about foreign policy on the part of some of the world powers that could again contribute to that kind of feeling of alienation and helplessness that results sometimes in some of the youth using unconventional means and guerrilla tactics for fighting back and in their own way trying to defend their people. Now they're wrong, and terrorism has to be rooted out in all of its forms, and extremism has to be stemmed at its roots. But at the same time, to do all of that means we have to fight it on. We have to fight extremism and terrorism on every front, and at the ideological level. We need to think about the policies that could feed into that type of behavior.
So in light of these, focused gaps that you pointed out, what did you think of, the communique? And I know one of the main messages they talked about was, increased collaboration, cooperation amongst organizations with the U.S. to promote and foster cultural interaction. So how do we bridge all of that?
Well, obviously, in one conference, not everything can be achieved, and the organizers must have thought carefully about where they want to put their focus and what is achievable in the one conference. And so they put their focus on speaking positively about the two cultures, and then making recommendations, like, for example, setting up a committee for American Islamic cultural communication. And more so, they praise the formation that seems to already have been done of a committee for overseeing such affairs. Probably this will be based in the Middle East. More so, they want to support local organizations that will help in the fight against extremism and terrorism. They want to foster communication and relations with universities, particularly. What this means specifically is not very clear. Maybe they will sponsor some chairs in certain universities for teaching certain programs, either about Islam as a religion or about the culture and societies of the Middle East.
So do you think these are tangible action items that will help address some of the issues that you were talking about?
Yes, definitely these will help. How much this remains to be seen. One might feel that more needs to be done and done quickly, but every little bit does help, and we appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Shabir.
You're welcome. And I'd like to say in closing that it was my honor to participate in that conference, and I couldn't speak of the conference without giving my thanks to the hosts who generously sponsored my visit.
And thank you for sharing it with all of us. Thanks, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Hey YouTube, we hope you benefited from this video. If you liked it, or if you didn't, let us know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more, check out some of our other videos. And don't forget to subscribe so you can get new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.